Imagine dedicating your life to someone, only to be thrown away like you never mattered. Imagine carrying the weight of not just your own heartbreak, but the future of two innocent lives, while the person who vowed to stand by you disappears into a world of luxury. Now, imagine that same person, years later, coming face to face with the consequences of his actions in the most unexpected place. Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we have a deeply emotional and suspenseful story about love, betrayal, and unexpected redemption. It's a story of a woman abandoned at her most vulnerable moment, only for fate to turn the tables years later. Stay with me until the end, because this one is going to leave you speechless. Before we start, let me know in the comments, where are you watching from? I love seeing viewers from all around the world. Now let's get into it. It had been 10 years, 10 long, painful years, since Olivia stood in the grand, cold hallway of a penthouse she once called home, watching as her husband, the man she had loved with every fiber of her being, turned his back on her. "Olivia, I've made up my mind," Ethan said, his voice devoid of emotion. He stood in his perfectly tailored suit, his posture stiff, his eyes void of the warmth they once held. "This isn't the life I want. I can't do this. I won't." Her hands trembled as she clutched her stomach, already showing the first signs of pregnancy. "Ethan, please. We built this life together. We built us together. How can you just walk away?" He sighed, rubbing his temples as if her pain was an inconvenience to him. "I never wanted kids, Olivia. You know that. I told you from the beginning. My career comes first." He turned away, staring out the window at the glittering city skyline. "You'll be fine. I'll make sure you're taken care of financially." Her heart shattered into pieces. Money? Was that all he thought she needed? She had married Ethan out of love, not for his wealth. But standing there, in that moment, she realized something painful. He had never truly loved her back. Tears streamed down her face, but she refused to beg. If he could walk away so easily, then maybe she had been blind all along. "I don't need your money, Ethan. I needed you." He didn't even flinch, didn't even turn around as he spoke the last words she would hear from him for a decade. "Then that's your choice." And just like that, he left. Olivia was alone, pregnant, heartbroken, and lost in a city that suddenly felt unfamiliar. She had no family to run to. Her parents had passed years ago, and she had distanced herself from old friends after marrying Ethan. She had given everything to him, and now she had nothing. The days that followed were some of the darkest of her life. She moved into a tiny, run-down apartment, far from the life she once knew. There were nights she went to bed hungry, her body weak, but her spirit refusing to break. She worked tirelessly, doing whatever job she could find, waitressing, cleaning, even taking night shifts at a factory just to keep food on the table. And then, after months of struggling, her babies were born. Twin boys. The moment she held them in her arms, everything changed. They were her reason to keep going, to fight, to prove to the world and to herself that she didn't need Ethan's wealth or status. But life wasn't kind. Raising two children alone was exhausting, physically and emotionally. The nights were long, filled with cries and exhaustion. But Olivia never gave up. Even when her body ached, even when her bank account was empty, she never let her boys feel unloved. She never spoke of Ethan, never told them about the man who had abandoned them before they even took their first breath. To her, he didn't exist anymore. Years passed, and Olivia built a life for herself. It wasn't glamorous, but it was filled with love. Her boys grew into smart, kind-hearted children who didn't need a billionaire father to be happy. They had her, and that was enough. Or at least, that's what she thought. Because one random evening, during a simple trip to the mall, fate decided to intervene. She was standing at a bookstore flipping through a children's book while her boys browsed a few feet away. Laughter bubbled between them as they argued over which superhero was the strongest. She smiled, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear, content in the moment. And then she felt it, a gaze, intense, unwavering. Her stomach tightened as she slowly turned, and locked eyes with the one person she thought she'd never see again. Ethan. He stood there, frozen, his usual confidence stripped away. His eyes darted between her and the two boys beside her, their boys. For the first time in 10 years, Olivia saw something in his eyes that had never been there before. Regret. For a moment, time stood still. Olivia's breath caught in her throat as she locked eyes with Ethan, the man who had abandoned her, the man who had walked away, like she meant nothing. And yet, here he was, standing just a few feet away in the middle of a crowded mall, his face pale, his eyes wide with disbelief. Her heart pounded in her chest, but she forced herself to stay calm. She wasn't that broken woman anymore. She wasn't the woman who had pleaded for him to stay. She was a mother now, strong, independent, and unwilling to let the past shake her. But then, she noticed something. Ethan wasn't just staring at her. His gaze kept shifting between her and the two boys beside her, her twins, his sons. Olivia's stomach twisted as she watched realization dawn on his face. His expression shifted from shock to something deeper, something more painful. She could see the thoughts racing through his mind. He knew the truth now. Her boys, unaware of the tension in the air, continued browsing the bookshelves, their laughter breaking through the heavy silence. They had no idea that the man standing just a few feet away was their father, the man who had left them before they even took their first breath. Olivia's fingers clenched around the book she was holding. She had two choices. She could turn away, pretend she never saw him, walk out of that mall, and never look back. Or she could face him, let him see what he had walked away from. She chose the latter. Slowly, she turned, lifting her chin as she met his gaze. "Ethan," she said, her voice steady, betraying none of the storm raging inside her. He swallowed hard, taking a hesitant step closer. "Olivia?" His voice was different than she remembered. Not cold, not dismissive. There was something else there now, something almost fragile. She didn't have time for this. Without another word, she turned to her sons. "Come on, boys, we're leaving." The twins groaned in protest. "But Mom, we haven't picked a book yet." Olivia forced a smile. "You can choose one next time, okay?" They pouted, but nodded, not questioning her decision. As she reached for their hands, she felt a presence move closer. "Olivia, wait." Ethan's voice was low, urgent. She tensed, debating whether to ignore him, but she knew him too well. He wouldn't just let this go. So she turned back to him, her face unreadable. "What do you want?" He exhaled shakily, his eyes flickering toward the boys again. "Are they?" He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't have to. Olivia narrowed her eyes. "What do you think?" He took another step forward, looking like a man who had just been hit by a truck. I didn't know," he whispered. "You never told me." A bitter laugh escaped her lips. "You didn't want to know, Ethan. You made that perfectly clear when you left." Regret flickered in his eyes, but she wasn't interested in his guilt. She had spent too many nights crying over a man who had walked away without a second thought. She wasn't about to let him waltz back in now, just because fate had forced their paths to cross again. "I just need to talk to you," he said, his voice almost pleading. Olivia hesitated. Every instinct in her told her to walk away. She had built a life without him, and she didn't owe him a single second of her time. But a small part of her wanted answers. Why now? Why did he suddenly care? She glanced down at her boys, who were now watching the conversation with mild curiosity. They had no idea who this man was, and maybe, just maybe, it was time they understood the truth. With a heavy sigh, she looked back at Ethan. Fine, but not here. His shoulders sagged with relief. Thank you. She wasn't doing this for him. She was doing it for herself, because after 10 long years, she finally had the power in this conversation, and she wasn't going to let him forget what he had done. Ethan followed Olivia in silence, his mind racing. He still couldn't believe what he had just seen. 2 boys who looked exactly like him at that age. His sons. He had sons, and yet he had never known, never been there. Olivia led the way out of the mall, her posture stiff, her grip firm on the boy's hands. She wasn't making this easy for him, and he didn't blame her. He had no right to ask for anything, not after what he had done. She stopped near a quiet cafe just outside, gesturing for the twins to sit at a table. "Wait here, boys," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'll be right back." The boys exchanged a curious glance, but nodded, already distracted by the pastries displayed behind the glass window. Olivia turned to Ethan and motioned for him to follow. She led him a few steps away, just out of the boy's earshot, before crossing her arms over her chest. "All right," she said, her voice cold. "Say whatever it is you need to say and then leave." Ethan swallowed hard. He had rehearsed this moment 1,000 times in his head, ever since he saw them. But now that he was here, standing in front of Olivia again, his words felt stuck in his throat. "They're mine, aren't they?" His voice came out quieter than he expected. Olivia let out a bitter chuckle. "It took you this long to figure that out?" "I didn't know," he admitted, shaking his head. "You never told me, Olivia." Her eyes flashed with anger. "And what would you have done if I had, Ethan? Would you have magically become a different person? Would you have suddenly cared?" She took a step closer, her voice shaking with emotion. "Because I remember exactly what you said the last time we spoke. You made it very clear that I was nothing to you, that our marriage was a mistake, that I was holding you back." Ethan's chest tightened. He remembered those words. He had thrown them at her in the heat of an argument, back when he was so consumed by his ambitions that nothing else mattered. "I was an idiot," he admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I was selfish, and I regret it every single day." Olivia's expression didn't soften. "Regret doesn't change the past." He nodded, looking down. "I know, but if I had known about them..." He hesitated, struggling to find the right words. "If I had known I was going to be a father, I would have..." "What?" Olivia cut in, her eyes filled with fury. "You would have stayed? Is that what you're about to say?" She laughed bitterly. "No, Ethan, you wouldn't have. You would have resented me. You would have resented them. And I was not going to raise my children in a home where their own father regretted their existence." Ethan felt like he had been punched in the gut. She was right. Back then, he had been so obsessed with his career, so desperate to prove himself, that he probably would have seen them as a burden. But now all he could feel was the crushing weight of everything he had missed. Their first steps, their first words, every scraped knee, every bedtime story, every birthday. He had missed it all. He looked over at the boys, who were still sitting at the table, chatting animatedly about something. They had no idea what was happening just a few feet away. No idea who he was. He cleared his throat. "What are their names?" Olivia hesitated. For a moment he thought she wouldn't answer, but then she sighed. Liam and Noah. Liam and Noah, his sons. The names felt foreign, yet familiar, like they had always belonged to him, yet he had never had the right to say them out loud. "I want to know them," he said suddenly, surprising even himself. Olivia's jaw tightened. No. Ethan blinked. No. You don't get to walk back into their lives just because you suddenly decided you want to, she said firmly. You weren't there when they needed you. You don't get to be there now. Ethan felt desperation clawing at his chest. Olivia, please. I know I messed up. I know I don't deserve a second chance, but they do. They deserve to know who I am. Olivia shook her head. They don't need you, Ethan. They've grown up without you, and they're just fine. He looked at her, really looked at her, and for the first time, he saw the exhaustion in her eyes, the weight she had been carrying all these years. She had done it all alone, raising 2 boys, without help, without support, and he had been off in his world of luxury, never once thinking about the woman he had left behind. Regret burned through him like fire. I don't know what you expect me to say, Ethan, Olivia continued, her voice softer now. That I'll let you walk in and be their father? That I'll trust you not to hurt them the way you hurt me? She shook her head. I can't do that. He looked away, struggling to breathe past the lump in his throat. What can I do? He asked finally. She was silent for a long time. Then finally she sighed. Nothing, she said quietly. There's nothing you can do. And with that, she turned and walked back to the boys, leaving Ethan standing there, his heart heavier than it had ever been before. Ethan stood frozen, watching Olivia walk away with Liam and Noah, his sons, his flesh and blood, and yet they had no idea who he was. As they disappeared into the crowd, an ache settled deep in his chest. He had always thought success would fulfill him, that wealth and power would erase every regret. But standing here, in this moment, he had never felt more empty. He couldn't just walk away, not this time. For the next few days, Ethan couldn't focus. His billion-dollar company, the endless meetings, the people who once seemed so important, all of it blurred into the background. His mind was consumed by one thing, his sons. He needed to know them. But Olivia had made it clear. He wasn't welcome in their lives. Still, he couldn't give up. So he did something he had never done before. He humbled himself. One evening, he parked his car outside a small neighborhood in the quieter part of the city. It was nothing like the penthouses and gated mansions he was used to, but it was warm, cozy, and full of life. Through the window of a modest little house, he saw them. Liam and Noah were sitting at the dining table, laughing as they ate dinner. Olivia sat across from them, smiling softly. The scene was simple, but it held something that money could never buy. Love. Ethan felt a pang of longing. This was the life he had missed, and it was too late to change that. But maybe, just maybe, it wasn't too late to make things right. The next morning, Olivia stepped out of her house, ready to start the day. She barely made it to her car before she saw him. Ethan, standing there, holding 2 wrapped boxes in his hands. Her heart clenched. "What are you doing here?" she asked, keeping her voice steady. He took a deep breath. I wanted to give these to the boys." He hesitated. "Please, just gifts, nothing more." She eyed the boxes. "You think you can buy your way into their lives?" "No," he admitted, shaking his head. "I know I can't, but I also know I've already missed everything. Their first words, their first steps, every birthday. I won't ask you for anything, Olivia, but let me do this, just this." She studied him for a long moment, then sighed. "Fine," she muttered, "but don't expect anything else." Ethan nodded, relief washing over him. That night, when Liam and Noah unwrapped their gifts, their eyes lit up with excitement. New soccer jerseys, the exact ones their favorite players wore. "Mum, how did you know?" Noah beamed. Olivia hesitated. "They were from someone who cares." The boys didn't ask questions, they just smiled, and for the first time in 10 years, Ethan felt like maybe just maybe, there was a chance for redemption. Ethan had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals, winning over ruthless investors, and controlling boardrooms with nothing but his presence. Yet nothing had ever made him feel as nervous as standing outside Olivia's house again, wondering if he had any place in the world she had built without him. Would she ever let him in? Would his sons ever forgive him? The next few weeks were filled with small steps. Ethan didn't push, he didn't demand. He just showed up, sometimes from a distance, sometimes through little gestures Olivia allowed. When Liam and Noah found brand new soccer cleats on their doorstep, they thought it was from their mom. When their school fees were mysteriously covered after Olivia struggled with an extra shift, she had a feeling she knew who was behind it. Ethan never mentioned it, because for the first time in his life, he wasn't doing something for recognition. He was doing it because he loved them. One evening, as Olivia locked up the small cafe where she worked, she found him waiting outside. The exhaustion on her face was evident, but so was something else, something softer than before. "You keep showing up," she said, arms crossed. "I will never stop," Ethan admitted. "I made the biggest mistake of my life when I left you, Olivia, and I know I don't deserve another chance. But I'm asking anyway, not for myself, for them." Her gaze flickered with emotion. "You don't just get to walk back in, Ethan. You weren't there when I cried myself to sleep, when I worked 3 jobs to keep food on the table, when the boys asked why they didn't have a dad." His throat tightened. "I know, and I hate myself for it." Silence stretched between them. Finally, Olivia sighed. They deserved the truth. That weekend, Ethan found himself in front of Liam and Noah, his heart pounding. He had rehearsed this moment over and over, but nothing prepared him for their wide, curious eyes. "Mom said you had something to tell us," Liam said, tilting his head. Ethan swallowed hard. "I do." He took a deep breath. He exhaled shakily. "I made a terrible mistake a long time ago. I left someone I loved, and in doing that I lost 2 of the most incredible people in the world." Liam and Noah exchanged confused glances. Ethan's voice broke. "That person was your mother." His eyes filled with tears. "And the 2 people I lost were you." The room was silent. Then Noah furrowed his brows. "Wait, you're saying—" Ethan nodded. "I'm your father." The words hung heavy in the air. For a long moment neither boy spoke. Then Noah whispered, "Why did you leave?" Ethan's chest ached. "Because I was a coward, because I was selfish, and because I was too blind to see that nothing mattered more than you." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes as she watched the moment unfold. Ethan hesitated, then added, "I know I can't take back the years I missed. But if you'll let me, I'd love to be a part of your lives now." Another heavy silence. Then slowly, Liam stood up. He walked to Ethan, stared at him for a moment, and without a word, he wrapped his arms around his father. Noah followed a second later, his small hands gripping Ethan's shirt as he buried his face into his chest. Ethan broke down. For the first time in 10 years, he held his sons, and he vowed he would never let them go again. A few months later, Ethan wasn't just part of their lives. He was their biggest supporter at soccer games. He helped with their homework. He showed up for every parent-teacher meeting. Most importantly, he never stopped proving to Olivia that he was in this for good. One evening, as they sat in the backyard watching the boys play, Olivia turned to him. "You really changed," she admitted softly. Ethan smiled, watching Liam and Noah laugh together. "I had to. For them, for you." She didn't respond right away, but when she did, it was with something Ethan never thought he'd hear again. Hope. "Maybe one day we can be a family again." Ethan turned to her, eyes filled with gratitude. "That's all I've ever wanted. If you enjoyed this story, Don't forget to like and subscribe to Stories of Hope for more inspiring stories like this one.